Talk to a group of people you don't know. And it's another thing to talk to a group of people you've known your whole life. So it's very emotional for me, but thank you for coming. I really appreciate you sharing this event with me. So I'm going to, I'm organizing this in a weird way, but I'm going to show you some artwork that's not mine and how I look at it briefly, and then I'm going to show you a very brief kind of history of my work, and then I'll be done. So let's get started here. So okay, so this is what I would call Nona's greatest hits. So these are works just as a way to sort of think about what I love, what I look at, and the way that I look at it, which is somewhat embarrassing because I have a very esteemed art historian here in the group, but Marcia, bear with me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this. All right, so as many of you know, I have been a printmaker for much of my life, and Piranesi is one of my heroes. So when I look at this particular Piranesi, the way I look at it, beyond the history of it, is I see the rhythm of the vertical pillars from left to right, the arches, rhythm of the arches from left to right, front to back, the rhythm of the staircase, front to back, and then equal to the sum of parts of all the other parts, there's a light entering from some unseen above place that makes an entirely different rhythm, which is back to front with the light. And that, to me, is a very exciting dance. This particular painting, and all of her work, really, recently deceased artist, Louise Fishman, you can see at the bottom, there's an opaque shape at the bottom, kind of facing us, solid at the bottom. And then it moves back to these extraordinary brushstrokes, horizontal, and it moves back again to these extraordinary vertical, wispy forms. And with all of that, it still feels to me as if it's painted with one breath. And that is something that I find very exciting. This particular Terry Winters painting that I love, illuminated from the back, as many of his paintings are, and then dark in the middle ground, and then light in the front, although dappled light, so that it's almost as if there's a light behind us looking at it, and we're activating the front surface. So it's very hard in the 21st century to make surprises, but I think that Martin Puryear does it. In this particular piece, which is a faux vitrine, you come into the gallery, and this is a kind of awkward, tilted, nothing of a piece that looks transparent, looks like you're seeing the floor right through it, the shelves, and then you walk around and you see that. And then you walk around more and you see that. So that's a pretty great example of surprises. In this particular painting, Kerry James Marshall, so it's an imagined portrait of Harriet Tubman, abolitionist, escaped slave. The bodice buttons in her dress and the fingernails of her husband make a cross. They kind of end up in his eyes. And it's being hung on the wall by museum handlers, and one of them has one white cotton glove and one black leather glove. And it's an imagined painting, which is kind of testament to the fact that, and when he made it, which is 2015, there was no such painting in a museum. This piece, Fischli and Weiss, it was at the Guggenheim. These are actually handmade shapes. And they appear to be everyday utilitarian items. They're not. They were made by the artists. And it seems to be an informal placement of simulated objects just sitting there. But in fact, and it pretends that it's not artwork, but in fact everything is impeccably placed and set up for contemplation. I mean, impeccably organized. So I found that very exciting. Morandi, another great hero of mine. In Morandi's work, the spaces between the shapes, the intervals between the shapes and the way they touch or don't, I think is a very vital part of the conversation of Morandi's work. This is one of my favorite prints by Whistler, whom some of you may not know, was a great printmaker. And in this particular piece, the entire conversation is the broomstick and the wall. And it's, they're conversing, and the exact moment of the temperature and the light and the distance is expressed in the shadow, which is right up my alley. So this particular print by Rembrandt, granted, we're not supposed to be looking at things, lascivious things like this, but look at the light between his torso, the darkness of his torso, and the way he casts a shadow on her body, and that brilliant light between the two. And then the way that he lifts that cloth with just incredible delicacy, that he's lifting that cloth that covers her. So that's, it's a beautiful Rembrandt. This particular piece is in a church in Rome, and it literally is, the figures are literally falling out of the ceiling, and they're breaking an actual painted three-dimensional, sculptural cornice of the ceiling painting, and the wall is a coffered gold wall, and the clouds and figures are tumbling out of the sky, and the shadows of the clouds, you can well imagine, the shadows of the clouds are painted on the wall. Very cool. This is a guy who makes 10-second clouds. He goes into a space with water spray bottles and various things and cameras, and he manages to make mist and make clouds, and he photographs them, and then they're gone. It's very cool. Neil Rauch, a German painter from Leipzig, who, when you look at this painting or a lot of his paintings, it looks as if it's one scene. But in fact, it's many different simultaneous scenes, some repeated, different scale, inside, outside, things just vanish at the edge from being inside to being outside, and I find that extremely exciting in his work. This is Picabia, and there was a show at the Museum of Modern Art not so long ago of his work and of a series of these kind of double exposure, let's call them, paintings. The frame he made for this piece of the same colors in the piece that are opaque version of the same colors. And I love the kind of I don't know what to call it, the run of going from across the eye, from the eyes of the two figures and those circles. I mean, just the direction of that, and how the thigh of the lamb is the shoulder of the man. So that double exposure, in a way, is, to me, very exciting. This is Redon, and he did a lot of prints. There's the lithograph, and he did a whole series of prints that were based on Edgar Allan Poe's stories. And this one, to me, is just absolute magic. I mean, there's no to match that kind of secrecy and drama is suspense. I think is very difficult, and he does it brilliantly. This is a piece by Louise Bourgeois. It's about life-size cloth, desperate embrace. Bourgeois said about orientation that horizontality is a desire to give up, to sleep, and verticality is an attempt to escape, and hanging and floating are states of ambivalence. It's an interesting description of this piece. This is Diebenkorn, another great hero of mine. Big painting, he kind of pulls you into this meditative center that's empty, and then makes you tiptoe around the periphery, to every inch of the periphery, and periphery happens to be something that interests me a lot. And you see, for me, when I look at Diebenkorn paintings, I can imagine hours that he's sitting in his studio looking at his paintings, contemplating his paintings, looking at every little piece of lint, every bump, every little edge, and not fussing with any of it, just reckoning with it. He knows it's there, and he's not fussing with it. And that's, to me, very exciting. So this last one, this series, Hokusai, I think that, I don't know, Marcia, you could probably tell me differently, but other than Da Vinci, I can't imagine that there's anybody who was willing to look at the particularity of every moment in nature, or human nature, as Hokusai did, and be capable of inventing, editing out so much, and inventing and encapsulating nature in order to express the totality of what he's seen. So, I mean, it becomes actually very minimal in what he includes and very maximal in what he expresses, including in these waterfall pieces, speed and sound, I think. So, okay, so now I'm going to me, a whole different kettle of fish. We're going way, since so many of you know me from my whole life, we're going back to 1974 BC. So at the time, I was making etchings, and a lot of them were of figures in rooms. Some of them were of figures of a person who happens to be in this room. And kind of looking at the room as if through the eyes of the person in the space. And interestingly enough, not so different from some of the kind of superimposition and directional, compositional things that I'm doing now. So since 1974 to 1923, I don't know, I mean, it's 2023, I don't know if I learned so much. In any event, I stopped doing figures at a certain point. I just wasn't as interested in the figure as in the space, and I realized that I could replace the life force of the figure, which in fact wasn't so much of a life force in the way I was doing it, that the life force of the light and reflection and shadow in the room was much more exciting to me. So I did a lot of watercolors and drawings of interiors of rooms. And I was living in Rome at the time. That, for all intents and purposes, is the scene from my studio balcony right in the center of Rome, and that's the Column of Trajan from 112 AD, I think it is. But my favorite picture is this one, which is a picture of my studio balcony from inside the Column of Trajan, which I had the opportunity to climb up in when it was being restored. And of course, I took a picture of my studio balcony. And I liked not only the subject matter of the piece, but the light in it. So light and shadow, it was a very big issue for me in my work. And there was a long period of time when my subject matter was windows. And in Rome, light is really intense. So window shutters of every kind are there to block out that heat and light, and also perforated metal screens and all kinds of varieties of ways to close off the light. And I mean, in a way, here shadows have a definitive shape, and there light has a definitive shape. And there's a kind of rhythm of these tones that, for me, is very exciting. Like white bounces off the page, and then black sort of pulls you into this secret darkness, and then there's all of this territory of echoes of grays, which I love. And one of the things that you see in my work is all these grays. And so I did a lot of, this is through a perforated screen. This one, for those of you who know, of course, at the time, my husband, a composer, was working on a commission for a percussion ensemble based on Ravel Bolero. And I did a number of pieces. I mean, you can... So anyway, I did a lot of pieces. I did watercolor. There was like 40 by 60 of this kind of image, and others that were this light coming through perforated screens rhythmically. So I did a lot of window imagery. And then at a certain point, my interest strayed off into all of these wonderful hooks and wires that are on the outside of buildings. I mean, your phone never worked when it rained because your phone lines were on the outside, and all that stuff. Wires, hooks, and their shadows. There's a wonderful quote by Louis Kahn, the architect, who said something like, the sun never knew how beautiful it was until it fell on the side of a building. And I love that quote, and I love that idea, the sort of the evanescence, the brief moment when light animates something and there's a shadow shape. So then I did a lot of watercolors and prints of the windows were kind of going more and more into the periphery, and I was concentrating more on the wires. This particular piece surprised me. I saw it recently. A curator was in my studio looking through flat files, trying to find an old piece that matched a new piece that was going to be in a show, and he came across this, which I hadn't seen, I completely forgot about. And it was interesting to me because I don't think it's all that different from what I'm doing now. So again, this was 1980 something or other, a long time, I haven't changed all that much. So then I was doing a lot of prints of wires, prints, watercolors, monotypes of wires. This one is a 77.5 inches wide, I think, etching, which amazingly, some of you know this, it was so thrilling to me. A composer friend wrote a piece for a string quintet based on this print, and it was premiered in Madison, Wisconsin. I went to the premiere this past September. It was absolutely thrilling to hear a performance of this piece. It was very exciting. So wires, this is a monotype in 5 sections. I think it's 160 inches wide or something. So wires. And then this is a picture of me in my studio in Rome, so you can see a little bit of the scale and youth. Then this is, I did a lot of prints where the wires began to be a little bit anthropomorphic. And so there was a series, this one dancing, there was a series of 5 prints, for example, that each one was of a figure doing something. This is dancing figure. And then these where they weren't figurative anymore, but it was kind of trying to see the body language in a way of how does the shape converse with the periphery, with the edge of the piece. And so I was working on that. And I happened to go, I was still living in Rome, but I went to a McDowell colony, an artist in New Hampshire, and sort of confused. I was looking to continue this work, but find a deeper space, and so to develop it in depth. And I happened to be, just sort of confused, wandering around, and I went out into the woods, which you'd think I would have had enough of in Hunterdon County, but went out into the woods and felt very much at home there, probably because of here. And I started looking at the trees, and that was a kind of depth that was exciting to me. And I ended up doing, 40 monotypes or something when I was there of trees. And I continued that a bit when I went back to Rome. And Steve Ford, who's here, would know because he saw the show. The most horrible solo show I ever had in my life was of pastels that I made of trees in Rome. Terrible. I mean, the only tree in Rome was the column of Trajan, and it was terrible. In any event, I did that, and then I went to Tokyo for a year. And for somebody who loves shadow, it was challenging because it's very hazy. I mean, there is no shadow in Japanese art, and I saw why, because there's almost no sun. It was very hazy. And the trees were the likes of which I'd never seen. But I did drawings there and monotypes and trying to figure that all out. But another thing in Japan that was very interesting to me and very confusing to me, in Western art mostly, if there are 2 disparate patterns, we make a transition, very gently. There's a transition from one thing to another. And in Japanese art, not the case. They kind of slapped 2 disparate patterns together without any transition, and I never really could figure that out. But I think now I'm still curious about that, and now I can't say I've figured it out, but I'm thinking about it a lot. So anyway, this was Tokyo, very, 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 very crowded. And I went from there, came back to the States, and I had the opportunity to go to a residency in an artist colony in Wyoming, which was a kind of open space. I'd never seen anything like that before. Oh, thank you. And so, and I, you know, at this point I'm visually totally confused from Rome and Japan and Wyoming. I mean, and so I was doing prints of these sort of breast-shaped mountains. I didn't know what I was doing. And then I went to Wesleyan University. I was teaching there a little bit, and I had a studio that had a print-making press in it. And I was making the most horrible print of the first snow on these breast-shaped mountains in Wyoming, and patterns of the hill that looked, you know, like Japanese woodcuts, ridiculous. And I kept printing, thinking maybe I could get it better, and I never could, and I had a pile of paper, what am I going to do with it? And of course, you know, having been in Japan, I made a life-size, I mean, my height, folding screen that I collaged the prints on. And I can't say it made it better, but, you know, it occupied me. And the other side was like a kabuki cowgirl, right? So, and then I'm leaving Wesleyan to go to a next place, and I noticed this tree in the parking lot, and I had never seen it. I'd never noticed it before. It was beautiful, and it had shadow, and, you know, it was beautiful. So I got interested in trees again, and I'm driving out to Iowa City. I had a wonderful studio out there in Iowa City in a cornfield, and I started to draw, again, sort of trees and my idea of trees. And at this point, I'm using graphite powder, which is what I use for these things. And graphite powder is kind of greasy. It's translucent. It's not as black as charcoal, but it makes beautiful, beautiful grays. I mean, I kind of dip cotton in it or rags in it, and depending on how much graphite powder is on whatever I'm rubbing with, determines the tone, and it's a very slow and kind of beautiful process of building up tonality. So I'm using that, and India ink and gouache. So I'm working on these. Then I went back to McDowell Colony, and I did a series of prints based on those drawings, and then I moved to Boston, where I live now. And I continued doing a lot of prints of at this point, sort of anthropomorphic trees. And I made a whole bunch of these little three-dimensional reliefs of that horrible screen that I made, leftover parts. I made little woods, forests, and things out of those pieces. And I made an installation of these 10-foot-high, freestanding, etching trees. I don't even know how to describe them. So I was still thinking about trees, and I did these drawings, and I had the opportunity to go to Ballinglen, an artist colony in Ireland, which is run by Dolan Maxwell Gallery. Ron Mumford is the director of Dolan Maxwell, and he's been there many times, and it's a magnificent place. So I had graphite powder with me and paper, and I was doing these tree drawings. And it was foot and mouth disease in Ireland. So usually you can walk through everybody's field, but now you couldn't because it was, everybody was kind of stuck in place. So I was just sort of looking out of the window and looking at clouds. And the clouds there, if any of you have been in Ireland, you know, I mean, they change every 2 seconds, you know, it's a rainbow, and then it's raining, and then it's beautiful sunshine, and then it's clouds, and then it's just changing all the time, magnificent. And the hills are magnificent, you know, peat, soft, you know, you just want to go up to the top and roll down and roll up the other side, it's magnificent. So I was drawing clouds. And I did that there, and then I came back to the States, and this was so long ago, it's embarrassing to say, but it was 2001. So, you know, bad things were happening in the world. And there was a lot of smoke, and black and white felt just about right at that time, and clouds felt just about right. So I continued doing them, and like this one, because I didn't have these beautiful Irish hills anymore, I think this one has a blue pastel line at the bottom that sort of gave it weight and feeling of sky without having those hills. And so different ways of handling with it. This, I had done a piece for the Rose Art Museum in Brandeis that was using woodcut roses, like made gazillions of them, and they were printed on a very thin paper called Gampi, and I had them leftovers on the wall, and I was looking at a cloud drawing on the floor, and one of the roses just fluttered off the wall, God only knows why, and fell on the drawing, and it was just like wow, because it reiterated the surface of the page and pushed the clouds back in a way that I found very exciting. So then I was thinking about, okay, what other kinds of things could I think about that might be on the surface, and I got very interested in weather patterns, and I did a lot of things with weather patterns. This was a little chalkboard that I made out of balsa wood and stuff, and this one is I had this template. I can't remember why I bought it, but I thought it was so cool. And I had made this drawing that was almost like a tornado, and then I found a little marble that looked like Earth looking at it from space, so I just had to make this shelf like that. So there were other things, shelves included, and this one, I started thinking about all the things that are out there in space that are, surveillance things that are out there, and that became very interesting to me. And this is the symbol for electromagnetic waves. And then, and this is 2011, so more and more I began to feel very, as some of you may and some of you may not, but I feel personally, that there's all this stuff out there, this intense, I want it now, surveillance and signals and all this stuff that we don't see, but that's out there in space, and it's kind of like an invasion of noise and input. So I started interspersing that stuff, imagining that stuff and putting it in the sky. I mean, the sky is so much bigger than we are. It knows so much more than we do. We still can't predict the weather. It's just so much more powerful than we are. And I just feel like it's a kind of a battle between all the stuff we're putting out there and the sky. So that's, as you can see, is more and more in my work. And I did a bunch of pieces that were using laser cut fluorescent plexiglass, which had that kind of light in a way, that is the artificiality of it that I was thinking about. So I got this fortune cookie, and I looked at it. I thought, is this the furthest thing from reality that I could ever imagine? Because begin nothing until you have considered how it's to be finished. Anybody who, I don't know. I think a bunch of artists here, I don't think we have a clue when we get started how it's going to be finished. Maybe we have an idea. But the whole fun is to work on something and begin to listen to the piece, get it to a point where it's talking, and you're listening, and you're trying to make what it's telling you to do. And that's the fun. So I do a lot of that. So here's an example, not very good photos, but here's an example. So this was a piece that I was working on. I didn't like the lower right-hand corner, and with graphite powder, you can't really erase it. Watercolor, I can't put over the graphite powder. I'm using gouache, but I can't put it, it's a ridiculous ass-backwards way to work. So I just cut that piece off, oh, the hell with it. And then I got this piece of plexiglass, which I thought was going to be great in that corner, but it was dead. It wasn't blue. You can't get blue fluorescent plate. It was dead. So then I added some more, and I liked that blue that's on the upper part, and I had to mix a blue that, when it was under the plexiglass, would be the same blue as the top. And I did. So that. And so I think it has a lot more zing that way. And I did other pieces with this fluorescent plexiglass. And okay, so this is another little moment that you have to see, because it was a good moment. I won a lottery to go skydiving, and I went, and it was great. And you're just. But the minute that string is pulled in the parachute, I don't know have any of you done this? It's incredible, right? It's the quiet. You've never heard quiet, or not heard. I don't know what to say. You've never experienced quiet like that. It is absolutely fantastic. So that was a great, you don't need to see all that, but that was a great moment for me. This one, for this is a diptych, and I wanted that discussion to happen between the two, the top and the bottom. And I like the fact that, I mean, I think now we're at the point where, you know, it doesn't faze us to look at something, look down, look up, look through, look at something that's pixelated. It's all fodder. It's all completely acceptable to us at this point. You know, it doesn't seem abnormal in the least. And one of the things that I really enjoy is, like in this one, where the mist sort of becomes pixelated, or the transition between the two. And that's something that in the studio I really enjoy doing that, making that. And another thing that I definitely think about, and I think maybe when I was showing those works of other artists, you could get a sense of that, of the kind of the choreography, let's call it, of, you know, like in this particular piece, the way that little bit of orange speaks to the other little bit of orange, and the way that, you know, flat edges morph into dimensional edges, and all of that play that happens, which is my way of having fun. Well, we all have different ways of making fun. Having fun, that's my way of having fun. And so also thinking about these, you know, artificial lights and information that's kind of permeating the sky. Weird colors. And so I'm interested, I mean, for somebody who loves black and white as much as I do, I mean, my favorite New Yorker cartoon is two people are walking down the street, one says to the other, yeah, I know it's a beautiful day, but I really prefer black and white. And that's kind of, you know, that's sort of me. And yet I'm introducing more color, and I mean, this piece is called Toxic Times, and, you know, we have some weird stuff happening in the sky. So, pandemic. I thought that I would, like everybody, you know, I'm going to get organized, I'm going to get rid of all kinds of stuff, clean out my closets, go through my flat files, and I'm going through these flat files and these drawings. I don't like that one, I don't like that one, throwing it down on the floor. Then, you know, ooh, well, wait a minute, that piece next to that piece is pretty interesting. And so I ended up, in fact, not throwing away a damn thing, but cutting these drawings up and making collages. And that was really interesting, because if you noticed, I mean, in the earlier pieces, the let's call it the techno chatter is in the negative spaces of the clouds. And the clouds aren't really interrupted, but in the collages, the clouds started to be interrupted. And I happen to be a real news junkie, and I'm listening to NPR all day long, which is really stupid in the studio. And, you know, the world's a mess. And so this kind of shattering of the clouds and breaking up of the space, and almost filmic way of things kind of repeating or being suspended, seemed very much like what's happening in the world. And so then I thought, well, it's one thing to have a cut edge in a collage, it's another thing to have it in a painting or a drawing, whatever you want to call these. And so I had actually had a collage on the left. It's a collage, but I thought, well, what would happen if I took that as subject matter and made a piece from scratch, painting, trying to simulate that. And that was interesting, because it just brought up a whole lot of other issues that like how do you disperse an edge, or how do you melt an edge rather than have it cut. So anyway, I did a bunch of things that were that. So you can see that piece over there. So that was made from based on a collage. But I wanted it to be more sky-like and more blues and so on. So that was the first piece that I did after this one, which where I was really breaking up the clouds and making this kind of fractured space based on the kind of thinking that I was doing in these collages. So the other pieces, those and the one that's out in the lobby, are pieces that were kind of a result of the collages. And that's it.
Wow.
All done. If anybody has any questions, you can ask them. I don't know if I can answer them. Ron?
The collage that preceded that painting.
Yeah.
Is it, what scale is it?
It's a little bit bigger than this, but not much. It's about that size, yeah. And it wasn't, it was a rectangle, it wasn't a square.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want it?
I'd love to see it.
Okay. Anything, anybody else?
What kind of paper?
I'm using well, that's a really good question, Rocky, because I was using a Arches watercolor paper, cold press, but it's very bumpy, more bumpy than I like. And so I searched around a lot to find a heavy watercolor paper that would be smoother. And I found one, which is, I don't remember now who makes it, and I got it, a lot of it, and the graphite powder reacts very nicely on it, but the watercolor was not good on it at all. Very hard to figure out how to do that. I mean, it's a very ass-backwards work, the way that I'm working, because I do the watercolor first, kind of random, and then I look at it and try to figure out, okay, where are the cloud shapes going to be? Wow. And I start to put them in a little bit with graphite powder. And then, but I can't put as I said before, I can't put the watercolor on top of the graphite powder because it turns black, and then where I want to put the gouache has to be left white. It's crazy. But in a way, it's interesting because it means that I'm constantly, that fortune cookie, I'm constantly trying to figure out, okay, where's it going to go next? Tell me where you want to go next, and hoping that it's going to do that. The part that's fun is trying to get it to move around. Like in this particular piece, there are different viewpoints of it. I mean, it's kind of like an aerial view up there, and then this is going into some weird chasm back there, all disrupted. This one, I was telling my friend Rena, who I stay with often in New York, that this was inspired by her rooftop terrace looking down at the city, and so everything is sort of. And then a lot of times what I'm enjoying in these, and even in the collages, I mean, they were collages, but I went back and worked into them a bit, where I'm trying to get something that's, in front, it's in front in one place and behind in another place, or maybe begins to feel dimensional because you build up a shadow underneath and so on. So it's that kind of play, fiddling around, doing a lot of fiddling around. Anyway, yeah. Howard.
Probably one of the best artist talks I've ever heard. I really mean that, and I've heard a lot of them. I mean, it's almost, I almost think I know the answer, but I'll ask it anyway. Do you ever use any reference materials particularly for your clouds, let's say? I mean, I know
No.
these are all kind of just created as a process of putting down the graphite.
Yes, and it's really all about edges, and trying not to make puppy dogs, kitty cats, French breads, and other lovely recognizable shapes, right?
In the clouds, right.
So it's really it's really the edge. Trying to get that edge trying to get the breathe. Any other questions?
Nona, I just want to thank you on behalf of the museum. It is a fabulous talk, and we who are here every day are so grateful because we get to see this beautiful work every day, and we've enjoyed it for the last month, and we have a couple more months to go, so we are just thrilled to have it here. Thank you. I didn't mean to cut off any questions if there were any more, but thank you so much.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I think you know that I'm very connected to this area, and it's very moving to me to be here in Hunterdon County having a show. So